Jill Nalder, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We've had all sorts of people on this podcast, and I can honestly say you are one of the guests I am most excited to interview.
Well, I'm honoured. I've seen you've had on in the past, so I'm surprised I'm here. So,
Well, look, I'm not surprised at all because I absolutely loved It's a Sin. It was genuinely one of the most powerful programmes I think I've ever watched. And it took me days actually to get over it. And of course, a huge part of the show is based around the character Jill, and you are the real Jill.
Yes.
Can you believe how popular the show has been?
Honestly, I can't believe it. I know that Russell is so brilliant, and I've known Russell since we were teenagers, and I knew that it was a great script. That I did know, but I think even he himself is surprised by how it's been received. So we are overwhelmed by it, and I'm overwhelmed because it's I've got to say loosely based. It's not like really true every single bit of my life or anything like that. You know, there was a lot of friends of mine and Russell's and people that we knew together and all that kind of thing. So he as a writer has drawn on a lot of experiences, and I recognize, you know, things, and I see and I think, oh no, not really, I didn't really do that.
There's even a hashtag though, isn't there? Hashtag Be More Jill.
I can't
essentially be a great person. I mean, that must be quite nice to have a hashtag named after you.
Do you know, it's beyond a belief. It's so crazy. It's lovely. It's, you know, all my friends have been sending me little Be More Jill things, and a cushion appeared last night with Be More Jill on it. I'm not going to that where that's going. And so of course it's all amazingly overwhelming is what it is.
Well, look, we'll talk a bit more about the show in a minute, but first, with all our guests, we like to get you settled into Downing Street. Yes. So let's just imagine now you're behind that number 10 door. And firstly, what is the personal item that you would take with you from home, do you think? Well,
I'll take some photographs of my mum and my dad. A photograph of my mum and dad, yeah, that's it.
Lovely.
It's so fun.
And what would you request as your first meal on your first night in number 10? You got a favourite dinner?
Oh, I'm going to have a beautiful a vegetarian pad thai.
Nice. Okay. Haven't had that one before. And who is the first person you call as Prime Minister? You can phone anyone you want in the whole world. They can be world leaders. They could be personal friends. Who are you going to call?
I'm going to call... Who am I going to call? That is a big one. I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to call my best friend, Jay Alexander.
Lovely.
Musical director, West End musical director. And I'm going to call him. If I'm in the house on my own, that's who I'm going to call.
Perfect. And let's talk a bit about your background now, because people will be fascinated to know, you know, how much of the show is based on you. So you grew up in Neath in South Wales, not too far from where I grew up. And you, as you've said, were a childhood friend of Russell T Davies, the writer of It's a Sin. You studied musical theatre at Mount View Academy in London and genuinely lived in a flat with gay friends, which you dubbed the Pink Palace, as in the show.
Yes.
And then in the 1980s, as the HIV Aids epidemic hit, you lost several of your friends to the disease and, again, as depicted in the show, sat by many bedsides, witnessing many goodbyes.
Yeah.
So, firstly, I mean, we've talked about the buzz around the show, but I wonder what it was like actually watching it for you, because, you know, it must have brought back a lot of memories for you.
It did bring back a lot of memories. It was emotional to watch it. It was also quite anxious to watch it, to see how it was going to be, because I couldn't totally take myself into it as a normal viewer like I watch anything else, because of course I got an interest in to know how it was going to receive, how the public were going to receive it, how each scene would pan out, and you know, how they would represent, because I hadn't seen it. We couldn't, of course, have the showing, the sort of showing after the wrap because of COVID. So I hadn't seen it at all. I'd seen a few clips of it, which had to do some voiceover stuff involving it. So I heard rumours, and it was very emotional to watch it.
And there was genuinely a pink palace. That's where you lived in the early 80s.
Well, I did exactly live in the Pink Palace, and let me describe it to you. It was pink and it was a palace. So it's not exactly as Russell has it in the show. It was a bit smaller than that, because that looks like the biggest flat in the history of London. And so it was quite a nice size flat. But when we saw it, it was pink. So it had a pink huge pink sofa. It had pink curtains. It had dusky pink walls with sort of flock wallpaper on them. It had a dark sort of purpley carpet. It had chandeliers. It had a sort of silver service and ornaments, fine ornaments everywhere. I think it had antiques. It was absolutely like a palace. And so we as students were like, oh my God, this place is amazing. And we couldn't believe it was £80 a week. And so we jumped at it, of course. And then everybody came in would go, oh, it's like a palace. And so that's how it came. We called it the Pink Palace. We still, before this happened, would say, oh, we had Christmas in the Pink Palace. That was when we did this in the Pink Palace. So, yeah, and it's really, people have really fallen in love with that name. Anyway.
And in the show, there are sort of four or five of you living in the Pink Palace at any one time.
Yes.
Do you recognise some of your friends from the time in the characters in the show who were in the Pink Palace with you?
I do recognise an amalgamation of people. That I do. We did used to do that kind of have a cabaret in the lounge kind of thing with maybe like 15, 20 people come around and people would get up and do a song or get up and do a party piece, things like that. So we definitely did stuff like that. And I can recognise friends, you know, maybe getting up and throwing a frock on, that kind of thing. Doing a little bit of a party like that.
And there's a lot of fun in the show, but of course it's also, you know, quite a harrowing watch at times. I said earlier, you know, it stayed with me for a few days after, particularly the third episode, which those who've seen it will know there's a big twist in the tale, and I don't want to spoil it for everyone. But I think the third episode and the final episode are very, very difficult to watch. And was that difficult for you to watch as well?
You know, I sort of watch it with a kind of chill, really, to remember it all. You know, it is difficult to watch, and I do know that stories were an amalgamation of a lot of truth in that story there, and it is a very harrowing story. So yeah, it makes you cry. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I've had people phoning me up. I've had a couple of friends phoning me up, obviously highly emotional friends, and I think everyone is emotional because we are in lockdown. So I think that's making people even more emotional than maybe they would be if they were going about their everyday lives. But I've had a few friends phone me actually in tears when they were on the phone. So it has touched hearts, definitely.
Definitely. Let's talk a bit more about the kind of historical context too, because you were living through this, of course, and the show does depict moments where Jill, the character, is desperately trying to find out what AIDS actually is. You know, there was a kind of information vacuum, wasn't there? Do you remember what that was like? Was that the position that you were genuinely in, just trying to find out what this thing was?
Yeah, that was very much the position, very much just trying to find. You'd pick up a bit of information, maybe out in a club or something. You might pick some up in a doctor's surgery, but very little, mostly in newspapers. It was gay press, like the Pink Paper, stuff like that had bits of information in. But I honestly think the lack of information was because really in the beginning, nobody actually knew. Science didn't really know. So you'd get an article. And at that point, you know, I didn't look for scientific papers or anything as clever as that. So it was just trying to see what was out there to keep a warning, or, you know, did anyone have it in this country? Did anyone have it in London? And then, of course, it started to get worse and people actually caught it.
And do you remember when the first of your friends was diagnosed?
Well, I remember when the first one of our circle of friends was disappeared, actually went home and didn't come back at all. I think we'd heard he was in hospital. We'd heard that he was ill. We heard that he had pneumonia, and the rumours were going around like that. And so I can remember, and then he died very quickly, because in the beginning there was absolutely no treatment, no knowledge. And so from hearing that he was ill, we suddenly heard he died. And then everyone was going, was it AIDS? And we think it was AIDS, and not really sure, and who had been to see him, that kind of thing. So that's my very first memory of, and that was one of our college friends.
And that must have been quite a scary, you know, revelation, and a lot of uncertainty about what was going on, I guess.
It's actually really scary, because it's such a mystery, and you don't know. Nobody really knew 100% how it was transmitted either. So there was all these rumours about, can you kiss anybody? You know, can you go close? Can you touch? And then, you know, the rumours grew and grew, really. So yes, it was unnerving, is what it is. It's sort of like encroaching in on you, closing in.
And in the show, Jill doesn't seem to have too many reservations about, diving in for a hug with her friends. But for you at the time, purely because of the uncertainty around it and the lack of information, were you ever sort of afraid for your own health being around people who had HIV?
I absolutely was never afraid of diving in for a hug, that's for sure. I was aware of it in the background of, being careful, should we be kissing or anything like that. I think that made me a bit aware, a bit, because you're not sure and you don't want to be stupid, you don't want to take a risk, but physically touching people, no, that was out there, that it was caught, if it was, it makes sense, doesn't it, that you can't get it from touching, because otherwise it wouldn't just be gay men. So there's got to be something. So, unless you're absolutely, I don't know, paranoid, then you can soon see that you're not going to get it by touching or hugging someone. But I think people were, you had to be aware in any intimacy relationships or anything like that, that it was out there.
And you genuinely spent nights by bedsides, didn't you, in hospital wards?
Honestly, I did, and I can't think that. I mean, I know there's millions of people who spend nights doing that, looking after somebody that they care or love, Then so I don't think I'm at all unusual. I don't think that's unusual. I think that maybe the secrecy and the stigma is unusual, but and also when you're kind of caring for somebody maybe outside of a hospital situation, that you can help inside the hospital situation as well. So that's why I would very often stay.
How many of your friends did you end up losing to HIV and AIDS?
Honestly, as a group of us, we're talking up to 10 friends, probably.
10 friends?
Probably talking up to that. But, everyone's got a group of friends, haven't they? So my dearest and closest friends, I lost 3. And then you have your social circle. I mean, quite a few of our group. I mean, we were a very small group in drama school, and 3 of our college friends died from our group in drama school. So that's quite, we were only a small group of about 20 people. So.
And in the show, Jill is depicted as being strong and resilient, but it must have taken quite a toll on you to lose that many friends.
Well, it probably did. I don't know, because I was so much younger. I do question where I got the energy to work and do the hospital visits and the fundraising and all that kind of thing. I think, oh my, did I ever have that amount of energy? I don't know. But it changes you. That's what I've thought. I think it changes your outlook on life. You lose people, and I'm not the first to lose people very young, of course. So, I think we were young, we were in our 20s and maybe early 30s. So that takes a toll on your overall emotional outlook, other than the grief that you suffer at the time, which is the same as anyone would suffer grief. But again, you have going forward, you put that into your life as a way of moving forward.
And why do you think you stuck by your friends? At a time when other people were turning away or running away scared, what is it about you, do you think?
I have no idea what that is about me, but that was never a question in my head. That would be never a question. And I would, hope that that's the way I would be now in any situation. That was my life, actually. That was that was where my life was. It was with my friends. It was in the, the theatre, and it was part and parcel of all the way that we were living. So.
And let's imagine you had been Prime Minister in the 1980s. So you were in charge and not Margaret Thatcher. What do you think you would have done differently? What would have really helped at the time?
Well, I think that putting something out like Clause 28, of course, was, that couldn't have been worse, really, to even further sort of... So I would have got rid of that immediately.
And Clause 28, just in case people don't know, is also called Section 28, which was essentially banning what they deemed the promotion of homosexual lifestyles in school. So it meant that there was no discussion of gay people in school, basically, was there?
Exactly, but it's also then even saying you can't promote homosexuality or gay life in school tells you that as an adult you're doing something wrong anyway. That's putting it out there that this is not a fit lifestyle to allow to be talked about in our society. So that is just, it seems a cruel twist in the whole thing of people having an illness like that. So I would certainly have tried for overall more tolerance in the society, especially as far as people's sexuality in any shape or form is going, if I were Prime Minister.
And the interesting thing about watching the show at a time like this is obviously we're going through a global pandemic, yes. And you can't help but draw comparisons between the way this pandemic's been handled compared to the way the HIV AIDS epidemic was handled. And, you know, it did take the government, didn't it, years really to publicly acknowledge what was going on, whereas with COVID-19 it's been instant, overnight. Everyone jumped at the need to do something.
And actually, I don't know that they would ever do, or there would ever be a commercial like that, the Don't Die of Ignorance commercials in the 80s. I mean, it was a nice thing, I suppose, to put out Don't Die of Ignorance, but it made it look like it was a horror film. It made people feel like, okay, you're saying don't die of ignorance and trying to educate people, but in a way, it's even more of a stigma, because then you're looking at one section of society, because even that commercial said it's only it's in small sections of society at the moment, and so you're putting out there that that's a section of society, will be spreading it in a way into the rest of the world. So and it didn't. Of course, anyone can get it, and that's absolutely true. Anyone can get it, and really, the gay society, the gay men, and the surrounding gay community should have been hailed and praised for their handling of it, in allowing, in maybe preventing it spreading further if they'd been handled with love and care. It may be, yes, it's unfortunate. It's just the way a virus is, that it's come to this part of the community. That's like a warning to what, and instead of being praised for being the warning, this is then being condemned for being that section of society that's going to spread it. Not, let's look after you, and then let's think of the rest of the world. So I think that as trailblazers, they were trailblazers. They were fighting their corner. They were taking drugs that were experimental. So everything that they did has enabled people to have a good life now with HIV.
Yeah, and the parallels with COVID-19 are quite striking when you think of the way that gay men were blamed essentially for having the virus, weren't they? It was sort of their own fault. They shouldn't be so promiscuous.
Exactly.
Whereas, we wouldn't blame an octogenarian for catching COVID-19, would we? We wouldn't say, oh, silly Vera, she went down the supermarket when she shouldn't have. Thank God. I'd be horrified if anyone ever said that about anyone with COVID-19. So, when you look back now with that kind of historical reference of the current pandemic, you can really see, can't you, how the gay community were demonised, really, for the virus.
And some of the headlines and some of the things that I've heard, as they've been playing in my ear, some of the newspaper broadcasting, some of the broadcasting that went on at the time, and how people would say, if it was a son of mine. I heard one lady on a broadcast say, if it was a son of mine, I'd rather shoot him. That's and you think, just because they got ill, and instead of looking after people that are ill with love and care, then people are saying such extreme things that they would rather lose their son in a different way. Just unimaginable now, really. I suppose unimaginable, but perhaps not when you look at different places around the world.
And that's another thing that comes out in the show, is the relationship that Jill has with some of the parents who are involved in it. Was that something you had to deal with too? Well, truly,
we did deal with people's families. We did have to, and in different ways, of course, because families are dealing with this crisis themselves. So you try to weigh up between trying to be loyal to your friend and also realizing that a family is so important, and they don't understand because they don't even know that their son is gay. And now it's too late to form the relationship that you might want to form, because there's now no time. So, and you can say some of the stuff at somebody's bedside, but you can't have that ongoing relationship. So very hard, I think, for parents of people at the time to try to, relearn a whole relationship with their son. and almost impossible, and completely impossible, actually.
And obviously the show looks at the 1980s, but there are examples in more recent history of the way that people with HIV and AIDS have been stigmatised. I mean, there was even a bit of a briefing war, wasn't there, in the media over PrEP, which is the preventative drug that prevents around 99% of HIV infections, and that was sort of presented as, okay, well, we can do this on the NHS, but then you're not going to get your cataract operations, etc. And that was only a few years ago.
And it probably is a few years ago, but it feels like even more recently than that. Those arguments are out there to, will they supply PrEP to, for people to go out and have fun or whatever, So I think that probably with any disease that's sexually transmitted, there will always be questions as to how people should behave, because, I'm sure there's questions about contraception. There's certainly questions about, abortion and all that kind of thing. Anything that's related to the way people behave is always going to have a bit of stigma. But basically, there's always people trying to say that gay men shouldn't behave as they do.
And it's interesting that it's often portrayed as fun, because, as a gay man myself, I remember, falling in love as a teenager and having my first relationships, monogamous relationships, and they were overshadowed by the fear of HIV. Every time you had a new relationship, even if it was a long-term relationship, you would be afraid of having HIV or catching HIV, and that really took the edge off those exciting early romances.
Yes, exactly, and well, of course it's going to, and even if it's not a monogamous or a romantic encounter, like, who are people to judge that? Who should judge who two consenting adults, what people do? If it's two consenting adults, then that's what it is, and then otherwise you start to judge everything. You start to say you shouldn't do this, or, why is anyone behaving badly? And then it just escalates. So you have to, I mean, you can appreciate with everything costs money, so the National Health and the government have to plan well. But I mean, by preventing people getting HIV in the first place, you are going to eventually have a healthier, more open, and it's going to save money in the long run. So, anything that prevents, I'm up for any preventative. That's, get the vaccines out.
Well, let's fast forward to the current day and pretend you're Prime Minister now then, instead of Boris Johnson. What do you think you would do to tackle the residual stigma and the residual health problems that there are with HIV and AIDS?
With HIV and AIDS? Well, I think this is brilliant to get, the testing, to advocate for testing, get everyone tested, make it very common and easy to be tested, and non-stigmatizing. So it's so easy to get an HIV test. So that would be a definite move forward. And again, trying to make it like conversations like this, so that people feel it's more part of a natural healthcare, other than, because there is still stigma. I know people that are taking the triple combination. They still don't want to say that. They still, don't want to talk about the fact that they take triple combination. So I think destigmatizing, being open there, it obviously helps with writers like Russell making people aware of what happened, so that we can move forward in the world.
How do you think Boris Johnson would have handled HIV and AIDS if he'd been around in the 1980s?
God, that is a flipping good question. Would he have handled it? He probably would have, probably would have done a lot of talking about it. He might have come out there a bit more and talked about it more, and probably might not have. I can't see him having handled it brilliantly, because certainly there's so many, things with COVID that you think that could have been handled better. So I think it would all have been a bit crazy, and it would all have been a bit fearful, I think. A bit bumbly, shall I say?
And of course, the discussion in the 1980s might have been about, gay men. Today's discussion is a lot about trans people. And again, some people draw parallels there and say that it's very difficult for trans people at the moment. They're kind of trying to break through some of the barriers that perhaps gay people had to break through in the 80s.
Yes.
Do you have a sort of similar empathy for trans people as you did for gay men in the 80s?
Well, I would definitely have, like, you know, I don't want to be even patronizing to say sympathy, because I just think that people should have their rights. People should be absolutely respected for what they feel is right for them. You know, if they're not causing harm, then why can't society just accept people? I do know a trans lady who I've known for many years, who's an entertainer, and she once said to me, "I have not lived a day and without being persecuted." That's how she felt, and this was a long time ago that she felt that, and so she carried that with her entire life. And so I would just say, you know, be fair to people, be tolerant, and let people be what they feel they are.
Because it's become such a big discussion point, isn't it? It's become a debate, and I know trans people get quite upset when we call it a debate, because, as you said, we're essentially debating people's human rights. But there are people on the other side of the argument. J.K. Rowling, for example, has been drawn into it, and it has all got very polarised and very angry.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, you know, and it's complicated, because, and I don't want to, you know, certainly you know, say that people can't say what they feel as well, because, you know, I think people like J.K. Rowling, she should be allowed to say what she feels, even if you then come back and say, well, we don't agree with that. You know, that's okay. It's I suppose people feel like their right to speak out against something is also being trampled down. But, you know, unless you put out tolerance, then we're not going to further society. We have to allow people to be different. We have to do that, because, you know, otherwise all it causes is misery. At the end of the day, if people are confined to having to behave the way that society feels like, or the tradition feels like, then how can we grow and be more caring?
Probably a good thing that social media didn't exist in the 1980s, isn't it? When
goodness knows. I mean, you know, social media, me and social media. I mean, I find it terrifying. I find that the fact that even, you know, the fact that it's all over, that you can say one thing and suddenly it's everywhere, and sometimes you don't. Not me personally, but people don't mean. Sometimes things get interpreted differently over social media, and then everyone's on it in some way, and so, you know, I think that's a little bit overpowering as well. But I know.
Well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're almost out of time, Jill, because this conversation has flown by. I've loved speaking to you. But look, just to finish off, a few quick fire questions just for fun at the end.
Okay, let me try.
Firstly, which of the characters from It's a Sin would you appoint to your cabinet as Prime Minister?
Right, so I'm going to have Roscoe Babatunde, because he is out there. He's not afraid. And he has got a wildness to him, which I like.
Excellent. I can hear someone else has already.
I'm so sorry, because that phone is going again. That's the landline going now.
Is it finished?
Yes, finished.
Okay, great.
Let's do that again.
One more time for. No, don't be silly. Firstly, which of the characters from It's a Sin would you appoint to your cabinet as Prime Minister?
Right, so I'm going to choose Roscoe. Just going to say Roscoe, which is the character played by Amari, and he is just an out there, because he's bold, because he leaves. When he leaves his family home, he's got his own mind, his own power, and so you need that on the cabinet. You need someone who'll make a decision.
Excellent choice. Which song from the 1980s would you have as your anthem as Prime Minister? Did you have a favourite song back in the 80s?
80s. Oh well, I did, and that's another question. That's let me think. It's Raining Men.
Brilliant. And who would you build a statue to in Parliament Square?
Wow. Who would I build a statue to? Shall I build one to Russell T Davies?
I thought you were going to say that. He's going to love that, isn't he?
It's going to be a big statue, because he's 6'7". Do you know that?
I didn't know he was that tall. I have actually met Russell in real life, but I don't remember. I suppose because I'm 6'1", maybe I didn't notice just how tall he is. But yeah, that will be a big statue. Well, look, Jill Nalder, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Very welcome.
I think I speak for everyone. I say thank you for being such a brilliant friend to so many people over the years as well. They have been very lucky to know you.
Well, I'm lucky to know them. That's the absolute truth there.
All right, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Paul.